Don Corleone's Stoic Code. There's a moment in The Godfather that reveals everything you need to know about real power. It happens during Connie's wedding when a nervous baker approaches Don Corleone, hat in hand, begging for protection. The Don listens without interruption, his face revealing nothing. When the man finishes his desperate plea, Vito Corleone responds with perfect calm. "Why didn't you come to me first? Why did you go to the police? If you'd come to me in friendship, the scum that ruined your daughter would be suffering this very day." In those few sentences, we witness something extraordinary. Here's a man who wields more power than kings, yet speaks with the measured wisdom of an ancient philosopher. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't threaten, doesn't even seem angry. But everyone in the room understands that his words carry more weight than 1,000 screaming threats. What most people don't realize is that Don Vito Corleone embodies principles that the ancient Stoics would have recognized immediately. Not the violence or the criminality, but something far more subtle and profound. The ability to maintain absolute emotional control while exercising tremendous influence over his world. Today I'm going to show you the Stoic code that made Don Corleone the most compelling character in cinema history, and how you can apply these same principles to build unshakable power in your own life. But here's what's fascinating. Francis Ford Coppola and Mario Puzo, who created this character, were drawing from the same well of ancient wisdom that produced Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca. They just dressed it in a pinstriped suit and placed it in 1940s New York? The foundation of Stoic power? Don Corleone's power doesn't come from fear alone. It comes from something the Stoics called preferred indifference. The recognition that external outcomes, while naturally preferable in one direction or another, don't determine your essential worth or peace of mind. Watch how the Don responds to both triumph and disaster with the same measured composure. When his eldest son Santino is gunned down at a toll booth, most fathers would be consumed with rage, crying for immediate vengeance, making emotional decisions that could destroy everything they'd built. But Don Corleone demonstrates what Epictetus meant when he said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." The Don feels the loss deeply. We see it in his eyes, in the way his shoulders seem to carry a heavier burden. But he doesn't allow grief to cloud his judgment or fury to drive his decisions. Instead, he calls for a meeting of the 5 families, seeking a resolution that will prevent further bloodshed. This isn't weakness or acceptance of injustice. It's the recognition that his primary responsibility is to his family's long-term survival and prosperity, not to his immediate emotional impulses. This scene illustrates a crucial Stoic principle that most people misunderstand. The Stoics weren't emotionless robots. They felt deeply but refused to let emotions make their decisions for them. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal about the pain of losing children, the frustration of dealing with difficult people, the weariness of constant responsibility. But he also wrote about the discipline required to respond to these challenges with wisdom rather than reactivity. Don Corleone embodies this same discipline. He experiences the full range of human emotions but has developed the capacity to pause, reflect, and choose his responses based on his values and long-term objectives rather than his immediate feelings. This is what separates truly powerful people from those who are merely loud or aggressive. Consider how differently most people handle criticism or disrespect. They react immediately, often making the situation worse through emotional escalation. The Don, however, treats disrespect as information to be processed strategically. When Jack Woltz refuses his reasonable request regarding Johnny Fontaine, the Don doesn't argue, doesn't threaten, doesn't even seem particularly concerned. He simply says, "I'll make him an offer he can't refuse," and then methodically creates consequences that align with his objectives. This demonstrates another core Stoic principle. Focus on what you can control and accept what you cannot. The Don cannot control Woltz's initial decision, but he can control his own response. Rather than wasting energy on anger or attempting to change Woltz's mind through persuasion, he focuses his attention on creating new circumstances that will naturally lead to the outcome he desires. The discipline of perception. One of the most striking aspects of Don Corleone's character is his ability to see situations clearly, without the distortion that emotional reactivity typically creates. This reflects what the Stoics called the discipline of perception, the practice of examining your initial impressions before accepting them as truth. Throughout the film, we see the Don listening more than he speaks, observing more than he acts. When people come to him with problems, he doesn't immediately accept their version of events. He asks questions, gathers information, and considers multiple perspectives before forming his judgment. This isn't hesitation or indecisiveness, it's wisdom. The Stoics understood that most human suffering comes not from events themselves but from our interpretations of those events. Two people can experience the same situation and have completely different emotional responses based on the meaning they assign to what happened. The Don demonstrates remarkable skill at separating facts from interpretations, which allows him to respond to reality rather than to his assumptions about reality. When Virgil Sollozzo approaches him with the drug deal that eventually leads to the attempt on his life, the Don doesn't respond based on moral outrage or emotional rejection. He evaluates the proposal through multiple lenses: its impact on his existing relationships, its long-term consequences for his family, its alignment with his values and strategic objectives. His decision to refuse isn't emotional, it's calculated. This scene also reveals how the Don handles disagreement and conflict. He doesn't take Sollozzo's proposal as a personal insult or a challenge to his authority. He recognizes it as a business proposition that doesn't align with his interests. When he declines, he does so respectfully, even offering to help Sollozzo find alternative backing. This demonstrates the Stoic principle of responding to the content of situations rather than their emotional packaging. Most people, when faced with proposals or requests that don't serve their interests, respond with defensiveness, offense, or immediate rejection. They make the interaction about their ego rather than about the practical considerations involved. The Don, however, maintains what Marcus Aurelius called objectivity, the ability to see things as they are rather than as they appear through the filter of personal emotions. This skill becomes even more apparent during the meeting of the five families after Sonny's death. The Don could easily frame this gathering as an opportunity for vengeance or a platform for expressing his grief and anger. Instead, he approaches it as a problem-solving session. He listens to each family's concerns, acknowledges their perspectives, and works toward a solution that serves everyone's long-term interests. The other family heads expect him to demand blood for blood, eye for an eye. They're prepared for emotional escalation and power struggles. Instead, they encounter a man who has processed his grief privately and arrived at the meeting focused on practical solutions. This catches them off guard and actually increases his influence in the room because he's operating from a place of strength rather than reactivity. The art of emotional regulation. Perhaps the most stoic aspect of Don Corleone's character is his mastery of emotional regulation. This doesn't mean he doesn't feel emotions. It means he's developed the capacity to experience them without being controlled by them. The Stoics called this provocation, maintaining continuous attention to your internal state so you can choose your responses rather than being driven by automatic reactions. Watch the Don's face throughout the film. It reveals appropriate emotion when the situation calls for it, but never more than serves his purposes. When he's angry, you can see it, but the anger doesn't drive him to say or do anything he'll later regret. When he's pleased, he shows warmth, but not to the extent that it compromises his dignity or position. When he's disappointed, it's evident, but doesn't lead to self-pity or blame. This level of emotional control requires what the Stoics called the discipline of desire, learning to want what you already have and align your preferences with what's actually possible and beneficial. The Don demonstrates this beautifully in his relationship with his sons. He clearly loves all three boys, but he doesn't try to force them into roles that don't match their natures or capabilities. With Sonny, he recognizes the young man's passionate nature and channels it toward appropriate responsibilities while trying to temper his impulsiveness. With Fredo, he shows patience with his limitations while still including him in family activities and decisions. With Michael, he respects his son's initial desire to stay out of the family business, even though it disappoints him. This acceptance of what he cannot control, his son's individual personalities and choices, allows him to focus his energy on what he can influence. providing guidance, creating opportunities, and maintaining family unity. A less wise father might waste enormous emotional energy trying to change his son's fundamental natures or resenting them for not meeting his expectations. The Don also demonstrates exceptional skill at managing his responses to betrayal and disloyalty. When he discovers that Carlo has been beating Connie and may have played a role in setting up Sonny's murder, he doesn't explode with rage or immediately seek revenge. Instead, he processes this information strategically, considering how to handle the situation in a way that serves justice while minimizing harm to Connie and his grandchildren. This reflects the Stoic understanding that revenge driven by emotion typically creates more problems than it solves. The goal isn't to avoid justice or consequences for harmful actions. It's to ensure that your response serves your larger values and objectives rather than just providing emotional satisfaction. Strategic thinking and long-term vision. One of the most impressive aspects of Don Corleone's character is his ability to think strategically over long time horizons. This reflects the Stoic practice of memento mori, remembering that life is finite and therefore precious, which naturally leads to focusing on what truly matters rather than getting caught up in temporary emotions or short-term gratifications. The Don consistently makes decisions based on their long-term consequences for his family rather than their immediate emotional appeal. When World War II creates opportunities for increased profits through black market activities, he doesn't automatically pursue them. Instead, he evaluates how these activities might affect his family's reputation and relationships decades into the future. This forward-thinking approach is evident in his choice of business ventures. While other crime families are drawn to the quick profits available through drug trafficking, the Don recognizes that this business will inevitably bring increased law enforcement attention and societal condemnation that could threaten everything he's built. His refusal isn't based on moral squeamishness, it's strategic wisdom. The Stoics emphasize the importance of what they called preferred indifference, recognizing that while some outcomes are naturally preferable to others, your peace of mind and core identity shouldn't depend on achieving any particular external result. The Don embodies this principle in his approach to wealth and power. He clearly prefers success to failure, influence to powerlessness, but he doesn't make his self-worth dependent on maintaining any particular level of external achievement. This detachment from outcomes, paradoxically, often makes him more effective at achieving positive outcomes because he's not operating from desperation or fear. When Sollozzo kidnaps him and attempts to force his cooperation through threats, the Don's calm response frustrates his captor. Sollozzo expected fear, anger, or at least concern about his own safety. Instead, he encounters a man who has already accepted that death is a natural part of life and therefore cannot be controlled through threats alone. The Don's strategic thinking also appears in his handling of succession within his family. Rather than choosing his successor based on tradition, favoritism, or his own emotional preferences, he evaluates each son's actual capabilities and character. He recognizes that Sonny, despite his loyalty and courage, lacks the temperament for leadership. Fredo, while lovable, doesn't have the intelligence or strength required for the role. Michael, despite his initial reluctance and his father's preference that he stay legitimate, demonstrates the combination of intelligence, emotional control, and strategic thinking that the position requires. The Don's willingness to pass leadership to Michael, even though it means bringing his most promising son fully into a dangerous world, shows his ability to prioritize the family's long-term welfare over his personal feelings. The Stoic response to power and wealth. Perhaps most remarkably, Don Corleone demonstrates what the Stoics would recognize as a healthy relationship with power and material success. He clearly enjoys the respect, influence, and comfortable lifestyle that his position provides, but he doesn't seem psychologically dependent on these external goods for his sense of self-worth or happiness. This is evident in how he uses his power. Rather than using it primarily for personal aggrandizement or to dominate others for its own sake, he typically exercises influence to solve problems, protect his family and friends, and maintain order within his sphere of influence. When the baker asks for protection, the Don doesn't see this as an opportunity to increase his wealth or extend his control. He sees it as an opportunity to fulfill his role as someone who helps people solve problems that the legitimate system cannot or will not address. The Stoics taught that external goods like wealth, power, and status are preferred indifferents, things that are naturally preferable to their opposites but that don't determine your fundamental well-being or moral worth. The Don seems to understand this instinctively. He works to maintain and expand his influence, but he doesn't appear anxious or desperate about it. When circumstances threaten his position, he responds with strategic action rather than panic or depression. This balanced relationship with power is particularly evident in how he treats people of different social standings. He shows genuine respect to the baker who comes seeking help, even though the man has nothing to offer in return except gratitude and future loyalty. He speaks courteously to his barber, his gardener, and other service providers. This isn't calculated manipulation. It reflects a recognition that every person has inherent dignity regardless of their external circumstances. Marcus Aurelius, who held ultimate power in the Roman Empire, wrote extensively about the temporary and ultimately meaningless nature of external distinctions between people. He reminded himself that emperors and slaves were equally subject to death, equally capable of virtue or vice, and equally deserving of basic human respect. The Don seems to operate from a similar understanding. At the same time, the Don doesn't pretend that power differences don't exist or matter. He expects appropriate respect for his position and responds appropriately when that respect isn't shown. But his responses are proportional and strategic rather than emotional or ego-driven. When someone disrespects him, he doesn't take it personally in a way that compromises his judgment. He treats it as a problem to be solved rather than an insult to be avenged. Loyalty and reciprocity as Stoic virtues. One of the most compelling aspects of Don Corleone's moral code is his approach to loyalty and reciprocity. These aren't just practical business principles for him. They reflect deeper philosophical commitments that align remarkably well with Stoic ethics. The Stoics emphasized the virtue of justice, which they understood not just as following laws or rules, but as giving each person what they deserve based on their character and actions. The Don demonstrates this principle consistently throughout the film. People who show him respect and loyalty receive protection and assistance in return. Those who betray trust or act dishonorably face appropriate consequences. This isn't vengeful or emotional, it's systematic. The Don seems to understand that reliable relationships require predictable responses to both positive and negative behavior. If loyalty goes unrewarded and betrayal goes unpunished, the entire social fabric that makes cooperation possible begins to break down. When Bonacera, the undertaker, comes to ask for justice after his daughter is assaulted, the Don doesn't simply agree to help him. First, he points out that Bonacera went to the authorities instead of coming to him directly, and that this shows a lack of respect for their relationship. Then he explains what true friendship requires: mutual loyalty, shared values, and reciprocal obligations. This conversation reveals the Don's understanding that genuine relationships can't be transactional or one-sided. The Stoics taught that humans are naturally social creatures who flourish through cooperation and mutual support, but that these relationships must be based on virtue and character rather than just immediate self-interest. The Don's loyalty to his friends and family is unwavering, but it's not blind or enabling. When Connie calls crying about Carlo's abuse, the Don doesn't immediately rush to solve her problem with violence. Instead, he recognizes that she's married to Carlo and must find a way to work within that relationship unless it becomes truly dangerous. This shows his understanding that genuine loyalty sometimes means allowing people to face the consequences of their own choices rather than constantly rescuing them. Similarly, his loyalty to his sons doesn't prevent him from seeing their flaws clearly or holding them accountable for their mistakes. When Sonny's impulsiveness puts the family at risk, the Don addresses it directly. When Michael makes the decision to kill Sollozzo and McCluskey, the Don supports his son while also recognizing the enormous risks involved. This balanced approach to loyalty reflects the Stoic virtue of practical wisdom, the ability to discern the right action in particular circumstances rather than following rigid rules regardless of context. The Don's loyalty is strong but not stupid, generous but not naive, protective but not overprotective. the integration of wisdom and action. Perhaps the most impressive aspect of Don Corleone's character is how seamlessly he integrates philosophical wisdom with practical effectiveness. The Stoics emphasized that philosophy should be lived, not just studied, and that true wisdom reveals itself through appropriate action rather than just elegant thinking. The Don never comes across as an academic or intellectual, yet his behavior consistently demonstrates sophisticated understanding of human psychology, strategic thinking, and ethical decision-making. He doesn't quote ancient philosophers, but he embodies their insights in ways that achieve remarkable results in the real world. This integration is particularly evident in how he handles the complex negotiations and relationship management that his position requires. When dealing with other crime families, law enforcement, politicians, and business leaders, he demonstrates an almost supernatural ability to understand people's motivations, predict their likely responses, and structure interactions in ways that serve his objectives while maintaining his principles. The meeting of the five families showcases this integration beautifully. The Don enters this gathering knowing that the other family heads expect him to be consumed with grief and rage over Sonny's death. They're prepared for emotional outbursts, demands for vengeance, and possibly violent confrontation. Instead, they encounter a man who has processed his grief and arrived focused on solving the practical problems that led to the current conflict. This completely changes the dynamic of the meeting. Instead of a power struggle driven by emotion and ego, it becomes a collaborative problem-solving session. The Don acknowledges everyone's legitimate interests, proposes solutions that benefit all parties, and creates a framework for preventing similar conflicts in the future. This approach not only achieves his immediate objectives but also strengthens his position for the long term by demonstrating wisdom and leadership that the other families respect. The Stoics taught that the wise person seeks to understand the natural order of things and to align their actions with that understanding rather than fighting against reality or trying to force outcomes through emotional manipulation or brute force. The Don seems to operate from this same philosophical foundation, though he would never describe it in those terms. When Michael asks him about his business philosophy, the Don explains that his power comes from understanding what people need and finding ways to provide it while building relationships of mutual respect and obligation. This isn't manipulation or exploitation. It's a sophisticated understanding of how human societies actually function and how individuals can contribute to collective flourishing while achieving their own legitimate objectives. The Stoic response to mortality and legacy. One of the most profound aspects of Don Corleone's character is his awareness of mortality and his thoughtful approach to legacy. The Stoics practiced memento mori, regular reflection on the reality of death, not to become morbid or depressed, but to maintain perspective on what truly matters and to live each day with appropriate intentionality. Throughout the film, we see the Don making decisions with clear awareness that his time is limited and that his primary responsibility is to ensure his family's welfare and the continuation of his life's work after he's gone. This isn't anxious or desperate planning. It's the calm, systematic preparation that comes from accepting mortality as a natural fact rather than fighting against it or denying it. His approach to training Michael for leadership demonstrates this beautifully. The Don recognizes that his youngest son has the intelligence and character necessary to guide the family successfully, but he also understands that Michael needs time and experience to develop the wisdom and relationships that effective leadership requires. Rather than rushing this process or trying to maintain control until the very end, he creates opportunities for Michael to learn and grow while gradually transferring responsibility. This reflects the Stoic understanding that the wise person prepares for their own absence not by trying to control everything from beyond the grave, but by developing systems and people that can function effectively without their direct supervision. The Don builds relationships, establishes principles, and creates structures that will serve his family's interests long after he's gone. His famous advice to Michael about keeping friends close and enemies closer isn't just tactical wisdom. It reflects a deep understanding of human nature and the long-term requirements for survival and success in a complex world. He's not just teaching Michael specific strategies. He's helping him develop the kind of strategic thinking and psychological insight that will serve him in countless situations that the Don cannot anticipate or prepare him for specifically. The Don's approach to his own death, when it finally comes, embodies the Stoic ideal of accepting mortality with dignity and grace. He dies peacefully in his garden, playing with his grandson, having lived a full life and fulfilled his responsibilities to his family. There's no raging against the dying of the light, no desperate attempts to cling to life or power, no bitter regrets about roads not taken. This peaceful acceptance of death reflects a life lived according to clear principles and priorities. The Stoics taught that the person who has lived virtuously and fulfilled their proper role in life can face death without fear or regret. The Don, despite the moral complexities of his chosen profession, demonstrates this kind of peaceful resolution because he has consistently acted according to his values and has seen his primary objectives achieved. Lessons for modern leadership and life? The genius of Mario Puzo's character creation and Francis Ford Coppola's cinematic interpretation is that they've presented Stoic principles in a form that reveals their practical power without requiring any familiarity with ancient philosophy. Don Corleone's effectiveness as a leader and his compelling presence as a character both stem from the same source. His embodiment of timeless wisdom about human nature, emotional regulation, strategic thinking, and ethical behavior. For modern viewers seeking to develop their own leadership capabilities, the Don offers a masterclass in several crucial skills that remain as relevant today as they were in ancient Rome or 1940s New York. The ability to remain calm under pressure, to listen more than you speak, to think strategically rather than just tactically, to build relationships based on mutual respect and reciprocal obligation. These capabilities are as valuable in contemporary boardrooms as they were in the Don's study. The Don's approach to decision-making provides a particularly valuable model for anyone facing complex choices with uncertain outcomes. He consistently gathers information, considers multiple perspectives, evaluates long-term consequences, and makes decisions based on his values and objectives rather than his immediate emotional responses. This process isn't quick or easy, but it consistently produces better results than impulsive or reactive decision-making. His mastery of emotional regulation offers lessons that extend far beyond leadership into every aspect of personal relationships and individual well-being. The capacity to feel emotions fully while not being controlled by them, to respond to provocations with wisdom rather than reactivity, to maintain dignity and composure regardless of external circumstances. These skills enhance every interaction and contribute to both personal happiness and professional effectiveness. Perhaps most importantly, the Don demonstrates that it's possible to be both principled and practical, both ethical and effective. He operates according to a clear moral code, but he doesn't use his principles as an excuse for rigidity or impracticality. Instead, he shows how genuine wisdom involves understanding when and how to apply universal principles to specific situations in ways that serve both individual flourishing and collective good. The Stoics taught that the goal of philosophy is not just to understand the world but to live well within it. Don Corleone, despite the fictional and morally complex nature of his world, demonstrates what it looks like when someone has achieved that integration of wisdom and practice, understanding and action, principle and effectiveness. He shows us that the ancient insights about human nature, emotional mastery, and strategic thinking remain as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago. Your journey towards Stoic leadership. The question now is whether you're ready to begin developing these same capabilities in your own life. You don't need to become a crime boss to benefit from the Don's approach to emotional regulation, strategic thinking, and relationship building. These skills are equally valuable whether you're leading a Fortune 500 company, raising a family, building a small business, or simply trying to live with greater wisdom and effectiveness. Start by observing your own emotional responses to challenging situations. Do you react immediately based on your first impressions, or do you pause to gather information and consider your options? When someone disrespects or disappoints you, do you respond in ways that serve your long-term objectives, or do you prioritize immediate emotional satisfaction? The Don's example suggests that true power comes not from avoiding emotions but from developing the capacity to experience them without being controlled by them. This requires practice, patience, and honest self-assessment. Begin by simply noticing the gap between your initial emotional responses and your chosen actions. The more conscious you become of this space, the more freedom you'll have to choose responses that align with your values and serve your authentic objectives. Consider also how you approach loyalty and reciprocity in your relationships. Are you reliable in your commitments and consistent in your responses to both positive and negative behavior from others? Do you build relationships based on mutual respect and shared values, or are your connections primarily transactional and self-serving? The Don's approach to these fundamental human dynamics offers a template for creating the kind of relationships that provide both personal satisfaction and practical support throughout life's inevitable challenges and opportunities. But like all Stoic practices, this requires discipline, consistency, and the willingness to prioritize long-term flourishing over short-term gratification. The wisdom embodied by Don Corleone isn't just cinematic fiction. It's a practical demonstration of philosophical principles that have guided successful leaders and fulfilled individuals for millennia. The only question is whether you're ready to begin the patient, rewarding work of integrating these insights into your own approach to leadership, relationships, and life itself.